All eyes turned to the hunched woman pushing the cleaning cart across the marble floor of the Whitmore and Kane auction house. Her faded gray uniform reeked of cheap chemicals, and her calloused hands gripped a mop where they once held brushes that restored Renaissance masterpieces valued in the millions. It was a rainy April night when Elizabeth Beth Morgan, 44 years old, entered the main hall of Chicago's most prestigious auction house. Her worn shoes squeaked against the polished floor, and her cart, old and noisy, contained only the most basic cleaning supplies. Beth had worked as a night janitor for 6 years, invisible to the curators in their Italian suits, transparent to the collectors negotiating millions, non-existent to the specialists authenticating rare works. She cleaned the same halls where dozens of valuable paintings were displayed, her hands touching the same frames she once restored with techniques few in the world mastered. The auction house was particularly tense that week. A rare Renaissance painting, attributed to a 16th century Italian master, was scheduled to be auctioned in 5 days for $50 million. The problem was that no specialist could definitively authenticate it. Some swore it was genuine, others suspected forgery. Modern technology had failed, and without definitive authentication, the auction would be canceled and the house's reputation destroyed. In the main office, surrounded by magnifying glasses, UV scanners, and contradictory reports, Charles Whitmore gestured dramatically. "This is unacceptable," Charles shouted, throwing another report on the table. He was 51 years old, with perfectly styled gray hair and a Rolex worth more than a modest car. 5 specialists, 5 different opinions. How is this possible? "Charles, the painting is extremely sophisticated," said Victoria Ashford, 46, a Renaissance art specialist with a PhD from Oxford. "If it's a forgery, it's the work of a master. If it's genuine, it's one of the most important discoveries of the decade. I don't pay you for ifs." Charles exploded. "I pay for certainties. Gregory will have a breakdown if we cancel the auction." Gregory Kane, the 58-year-old owner of the auction house, entered the office with a somber expression. "I'm already having the breakdown. We have buyers flying in from 3 continents. The media is covering it. If we cancel now, our reputation is finished. And if we sell a forgery," Victoria said, "our reputation is even more finished. I can spend a few more days analyzing. We don't have days." Gregory slammed the table. "5 days. That's all we have. Find an answer." Beth was cleaning the office windows, trying to be invisible as always, but her ears caught every word, and her heart raced. A problematic Renaissance painting. Impossible authentication. She knew these dilemmas well. Derek Sullivan, the 39-year-old security guard, passed by the hallway and saw Beth. "Hey, don't take too long there. And don't touch anything valuable. We know ex-cons have tendencies." Beth gripped the mop tightly, but didn't respond. 7 years since she left prison, and the stigma still followed her like a shadow. "Derek, that was unnecessary," Victoria said, but she was smiling. "Just being careful," Derek shrugged. "We don't want another incident, do we?" Charles finally noticed Beth. "You, janitor, can you clean faster? We're having an important meeting here." "Yes, sir," Beth murmured, speeding up her movements. "Wait," Charles said suddenly, studying her face. "I know you from somewhere?" Beth's heart nearly stopped. "I don't think so, sir." "No, I definitely know your face." Charles frowned. Then his eyes widened. "My God, you're Elizabeth Morgan, the thief." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria stood up quickly. "The Elizabeth Morgan? The one who stole the Caravaggio from the Art Institute?" "The very same," Charles said, laughing in disbelief. "Gregory, you hired Chicago's most infamous art thief to clean our auction house? This is comical." "I didn't steal anything," Beth said quietly, but no one was listening. "Oh, this is rich," Derek said. "We let the fox guard the henhouse." "Brilliant." "I was exonerated," Beth tried, her voice firmer. "The evidence, you confessed." Charles cut her off. "I read it in the papers. You confessed to the theft." Under coercion, Beth felt tears burning. "My lawyer said I get a reduced sentence if—" "Spare us the sad story," Victoria said, crossing her arms. "You stole a masterpiece, and now you clean floors. It's karma, I imagine." Beth wanted to scream the truth, that she hadn't stolen anything, that her boyfriend Blake had betrayed her, that she spent 5 years paying for a crime she didn't commit. But they wouldn't believe her. No one believed her. "You can finish your cleaning and go," Gregory said, with evident disgust. "And from now on, Derek will accompany you whenever you're in the building." "I don't want risks." "Understood," Beth whispered, grabbing her cart. She was leaving when she heard Victoria say, "Imagine the irony. The expert who stole art now cleaning where real art is appreciated." Beth left the office, tears finally falling. She went to the staff bathroom and closed the door, letting out a muffled sob. 12 years. 12 years since everything fell apart, and it still hurt like it was yesterday. After composing herself, Beth returned to work. Part of her routine was cleaning the main exhibition hall at 11 p.m., when everyone had already left. It was her favorite moment, when she could be near the art without judgment, without accusing looks. That night, the problematic painting sat on a special easel in the center of the hall, illuminated by directional lights. Beth should only wipe around it, but her eyes were inevitably drawn to the canvas. It was supposedly a work by Giulio Romano, a 16th century Italian master. It depicted a Madonna with child, painted in the characteristic style of the Roman school. The documentation said it had been discovered in a private collection in Tuscany. Beth approached, not to touch, but just to observe. And the moment her trained eyes focused on the painting, she knew. "It's fake," she whispered to herself. Her heart raced. She shouldn't get involved. She should just clean and leave. But something stronger pulled at her, her professional integrity, her love for art, and the memory of her father, who always said, "Beth, truth in art is sacred. Never compromise it." She looked around. She was alone. Derek was doing rounds on another floor. The security cameras were pointed at the doors, not at the center of the hall. Beth moved closer, her eyes scanning every inch of the painting. She didn't touch. She knew that would be unforgivable. But with 12 years of experience in restoration and authentication, she didn't need to touch to see what was wrong. First, the blue pigment of the Madonna's cloak. It was ultramarine blue, yes, but the shade was wrong. In the 16th century, ultramarine came from ground Afghan lapis lazuli and had a specific tone that varied depending on the purity of the stone and the grinding process. This blue was too good, too pure, probably synthetic ultramarine, invented only in the 19th century. Second, the brush strokes. Giulio Romano had a specific technique of applying paint in thin, translucent layers, gradually building depth. But here, in some spots, especially in the shadows of the Madonna's face, the paint was applied in thicker layers, a technique more common to later Baroque painters. Third, and most revealing, the crackler, those small cracks that naturally form in varnish and paint over centuries. The pattern was almost perfect, but almost was the key word. Genuine 500-year-old crackler had chaotic patterns, but followed physical laws of expansion and contraction. This one had small irregularities, suggesting it had been artificially induced, probably with temperature variations. Beth grabbed her old cell phone and took several quick photos, focusing on the problematic details. She knew she was risking her job, but she couldn't let it go. $50 million for a forgery, no. Not while she could still distinguish truth from lies. She finished cleaning quickly and practically ran home. A tiny one-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood on Chicago's South Side. She couldn't sleep at all that night, just lay awake staring at the photos on her phone, her mind working intensely in ways it hadn't for years. The next morning, after a completely sleepless night, Beth made a decision that could change everything. She would write an extremely detailed technical report about her professional observations and leave it anonymously in Charles's office, without signing, obviously. Just the pure, objective technical facts. They could easily ignore it as the work of some lunatic, but at least her conscience would finally be clear. She would have done the right thing. She spent the entire day sitting in her apartment writing meticulously, citing each specific irregularity with rigorous technical precision that she had learned and refined over years of intense study and practice. She consulted old books from her small personal library, the few volumes she managed to keep after losing everything. When she finally finished after 8 hours of concentrated work, She had an impressive 5-page document detailing exactly and specifically why the painting was a masterful but definitely modern forgery. That night, when she arrived punctually for her work shift, Beth planned to leave the report discreetly in Charles's office and simply disappear. Never mention it. Never claim authorship. But when she entered the main exhibition hall at 10 o'clock, she found an absolutely chaotic scene that destroyed all her plans. Charles, Victoria, Gregory, and 3 other external specialists were gathered around the controversial painting, all gesticulating aggressively and shouting conflicting technical opinions simultaneously. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. A new international specialist, Dr. Alan Richardson from New York, renowned worldwide for his expertise in Renaissance art, had arrived that afternoon and declared with 90% certainty that the painting was genuine and authentic. But Victoria continued to doubt vehemently, her intuition saying something different. This is literally turning into an embarrassing circus. Gregory shouted, his voice hoarse from stress. Alan, are you absolutely certain? Can you stake your entire professional reputation on it? 90% certain, Alan said carefully, a distinguished 60-year-old man with extremely thick glasses, adjusting them nervously. But you need to understand that authentication is never literally 100% in the art field. 90% is definitely not enough for $50 million. Charles exploded, his patience completely exhausted. We need absolute and unwavering certainty. Beth was cleaning silently in the corner of the hall, the dense report burning physically in the pocket of her cheap uniform. She should simply leave it discreetly on some table and exit quickly. But then she heard something that made her stop completely and freeze in place. The ultramarini blue pigment passed absolutely all of our most advanced spectroscopic tests, Alan said with professional confidence. It's genuine lapis lazuli ultramarini, without any technical doubt. Synthetic or natural ultramarini? The question came out of Beth's mouth before she could control or censor it. Her voice echoed in the silent hall. Everyone turned simultaneously toward her as if she were a ghostly apparition. Confused and irritated looks. Excuse me, Alan said, completely confused about being questioned by a janitor. What did you say exactly? Beth froze completely, realizing the terrible mistake she had made. She had spoken impulsively, without thinking about the consequences. Now she had 6 pairs of professional eyes fixed on her with expressions ranging from curiosity to irritation. But she couldn't go back now. The words had already come out. I said, the ultramarini blue. Her voice was almost inaudible. Is it synthetic or natural? Because there's a critical difference between the two. Charles let out a long, cruel laugh full of contempt. This is absolutely hilarious. The ex-con janitor thief is now suddenly an international expert on Renaissance pigments. This is the best comedy I've heard all year. What a joke. Wait a moment, Alan said, taking a curious step toward Beth. Technically, it's a valid and pertinent question. The spectroscopic test we performed specifically indicates natural ultramarini, derived from lapis lazuli, not synthetic. And the presence of calcite? Beth asked, her voice gaining strength and authority gradually. She was crossing a threshold she wasn't sure she could cross back from. Genuine 16th century lapis lazuli had characteristic and inevitable mineral impurities, mainly crystalline calcite. Did the spectroscopic test specifically detect the presence of calcite? Alan blinked several times, surprised. I frankly didn't check that specific parameter, because if it doesn't have detectable calcite, Beth continued, her voice becoming progressively firmer and more technical, then it's almost certainly synthetic ultramarini. And synthetic ultramarini was only invented and commercialized in 1826 by Jean-Baptiste Guémet in France, making it completely impossible for this painting to be authentic from 1520. The silence that descended over the hall was so absolute and profound that you could hear a pin drop on the Persian carpet. No one moved. No one breathed. The air was completely static. Victoria was literally open-mouthed. Her jaw dropped in an almost comical way. Charles looked like he had seen a Victorian ghost. Alan stared at Beth as if she had just spoken fluently in ancient Aramaic. Gregory was frozen with a glass of whiskey halfway to his mouth. How could a simple janitor possibly know about Jean-Baptiste Guémet and the invention of synthetic ultramarini? Victoria finally asked, her voice betraying genuine shock. That's extremely specific and technical knowledge that most art historians don't even know. Because I am not, never was, and never will be just a simple janitor, Beth said, tired to her bones of hiding in darkness. Tired of being invisible, tired of being ashamed. She pulled the meticulously prepared report from the pocket of her uniform and placed it with determination on the table, next to the controversial painting, because 12 years ago, I was the principal restorer and internationally recognized specialist in Italian Renaissance art at the Art Institute of Chicago. And I am absolutely certain that this painting is a masterful but definitely modern forgery. You're completely insane, Charles said, but his voice was visibly trembling now. His confidence was cracking. Alan is a world-renowned specialist with 40 years of experience, and I identify precisely 7 distinct technical irregularities that conclusively prove this work is not authentic, Giulio. Romano, Beth interrupted with a firmness she hadn't shown in 12 years, pointing directly at her dense report. It's all meticulously documented here, with detailed macro photographs, specific chemical references, and direct technical comparisons with confirmed authentic works. Alan picked up the report with slightly trembling hands, his specialist eyes scanning rapidly but carefully through each technical line. His professional expression passed from initial disdain to confusion, then to something that looked very much like grudging respect and reluctant admiration. "My God," he whispered reverently after several minutes of concentrated reading. "She's technically correct about the artificially induced crackler. I observed these subtle micro-inconsistencies in the patterns, but naively thought it was just natural variation of materials. But she's absolutely right. It's artificially induced through accelerated thermal process. The mathematical patterns don't lie." "Alan, you cannot possibly be taking this seriously," Gregory said, desperation evident dripping from every syllable. "She's a convicted criminal, a confessed thief. Why would we believe anything she says?" "I never stole absolutely anything," Beth said, and for the first time in 7 long and painful years, her voice was completely firm, clear, and unwavering. No tremor, no shame. "I was falsely accused of stealing a Caravaggio valued at $80 million. But the complete and verifiable truth is that my boyfriend at the time, Blake Morrison, stole the painting in a carefully planned operation. He worked directly as my restoration assistant. He had unrestricted access to the secure restoration laboratory. And when the Caravaggio mysteriously disappeared during the night, he deliberately and meticulously planted incriminating evidence in my apartment while I slept." "Why the hell did you publicly confess then?" Victoria asked, still deeply skeptical. "Innocent people don't confess to serious crimes." "Because my overworked and inexperienced public defender insisted to me that with a strategic confession, I would have my sentence drastically reduced from 15 years to only 5 years. Beth felt familiar tears burning, but this time she let them fall without shame. "I was only 32 years old, was completely terrified by the system, alone without resources or support, and genuinely thought it was my only realistic chance of survival, and eventually proving my complete innocence. But Blake completely disappeared with the stolen painting to the international black market. He was never found or captured, and I paid a loan for a horrible crime that I absolutely did not commit." Beth took a deep breath, trying to control the emotion threatening to completely overwhelm her. "My father, Jonathan Morgan, was an internationally respected restorer, a master of the profession. He taught me literally everything about art, pigment chemistry, authentication techniques since I was only 5 years old. When I was unjustly imprisoned, he was completely emotionally destroyed. He spent years obsessively trying to prove my innocence through private investigations. But the unbearable stress, the devastating public shame, the betrayal of the system, it was all absolutely too much for his 65-year-old heart. He had a massive and fatal heart attack and died alone while I was imprisoned, unable to do absolutely anything. I couldn't even go to his funeral to say goodbye." The hall was in complete and sepulchral silence now. Even Charles seemed genuinely shaken. His characteristic arrogance completely evaporated like morning mist. Some had tears in their own eyes, Jonathan Morgan was your biological father?" said a deep and gentle voice behind them. Everyone turned simultaneously like a Greek chorus. An elderly, distinguished man, with hair completely white as snow, stood in the hall doorway, leaning slightly on an elegant ebony cane. Professor Henry Blackwell, 68 years old, legendary mentor to both Beth and her father Jonathan, and one of the most respected art historians in America. "Professor Blackwell," Beth whispered, barely able to believe what her eyes were seeing. "What are you doing here? How did you know?" "Gregory called me as a final independent consultant this morning," Henry said, walking slowly but with dignity into the hall. His gentle and wise eyes were fixed on Beth with a powerful mixture of surprise, relief, and something that looked very much like paternal love. "But I didn't expect even in my wildest dreams to find you here after all these years of searching. Beth Morgan, Elizabeth Morgana, my best student who vanished. You know the janitor?" Charles asked, still completely confused by the sequence of revelations. "Know her?" Henry let out a deep, rich laugh. "She was absolutely my best student in 50 years of teaching. The most brilliant, perceptive, and technically sophisticated mind in Renaissance authentication I've ever had the privilege of training. No one even came close. Jonathan Morgan, her father, was also my student decades before. That family had art literally running through their veins like blood. It was genetic." He approached Beth, placing a paternal and warm hand on her trembling shoulder. "I always knew deeply that you were completely innocent of the theft. Always. Not for a second did I doubt. I spent years and a small fortune investigating the case obsessively on my own. I found concrete evidence that Blake Morrison illegally sold the stolen Caravaggio on the black market in Dubai to a Saudi collector. But when I brought everything to the legal authorities, they said the case was formally closed and they wouldn't reopen it. You tried to actively help me?" Beth was openly crying now, years of pain and loneliness finally finding some comfort. "I tried tirelessly," Henry said, his own eyes moist, "and I never stopped believing that one day the complete truth would emerge from darkness into light. Jonathan made me solemnly promise on his deathbed that I would take care of you, that I would find you and help you. But you completely disappeared after leaving prison. I searched for years, hired investigators, placed ads. Nothing. I didn't want to be found," Beth said, her voice breaking. "I was deeply ashamed, completely emotionally destroyed. I thought I could never honestly work with art again, that this chapter was permanently closed." Henry picked up her technical report from the table and began reading with extreme care, occasionally picking up a magnifying glass to examine the painting directly, focusing meticulously on the specific points Beth had identified with precision. "She is completely and absolutely correct," he said finally, looking directly at Charles and Gregory with indisputable authority. "This is a truly exceptional forgery, probably the work of someone who studied Giulio Romano extensively and obsessively for years. But it's definitely modern. I would estimate made in the last 10 to 15 years at most." Ellen nodded reluctantly but honestly. "I need to redo all the tests with the new parameters she identified. But if the Ultramarini really doesn't have characteristic calcite, she's completely right, and I was professionally and embarrassingly wrong." Gregory was visibly pale as paper. $50 million. We almost sold a sophisticated forgery for $50 million. The scandal would have destroyed everything we've built. "Thanks exclusively to her," Henry said, pointing emphatically at Beth. "You didn't sell and avoided complete disaster. Beth just literally saved the reputation and possibly the continued existence of this entire auction house. And you owe everything to a woman you were treating cruelly and unjustly as a worthless criminal." Charles looked at Beth, his characteristic arrogance completely evaporated and replaced by something that looked very much like genuine shame. "We judged you severely, without knowing the complete story, without giving the benefit of doubt, without basic humanity. Everyone judges," Beth said, wiping the tears with the back of her hand. "I'm extremely accustomed to it. It's been my reality for 12 years. You absolutely shouldn't have to be," Victoria said, taking a significant step forward. Her expression had changed dramatically and completely. "Beth, Dr. Morgan, may I respectfully call you that now?" "You may," Beth said softly. "I was cruel, presumptuous, and completely wrong, Victoria continued, her voice breaking with genuine emotion. You possess deep and technical knowledge that I only dream of having someday, and I would like to apologize deeply and sincerely, without excuses or justifications. Beth looked at Victoria, the woman who had mocked her so cruelly just hours before, now asking for forgiveness with sincere eyes and trembling voice. I accept completely, Beth said. Everyone makes terrible mistakes, hasty judgments. I understand that better than absolutely anyone on this planet. Derek appeared hesitantly in the doorway, having heard the entire final part of the conversation through the intercom system. Dr. Morgan, I also owe deep apologies. I commented cruelly about ex-cons and criminal tendencies. It was ignorant, inhumane, and completely cruel. Forgive me. You're completely forgiven, Beth said. Gregory approached formally, extending his hand in an official gesture. Dr. Morgan, I cannot undo how we treated you horribly, but I can offer something tangible and meaningful. A permanent position here, as our exclusive chief specialist in Renaissance art authentication. Extremely competitive salary with the market, complete and unlimited resources, and total professional autonomy. You deserve it. Beth looked at the extended hand, her heart racing dangerously. A real position, working professionally with art again. It was literally everything she had dreamed and longed for over 12 long years. The complete redemption that seemed impossible. But then she thought deeply about her father, about his unrealized legacy, and she knew exactly what he would say. She could hear his voice in her head. I deeply appreciate the generous offer, Beth said carefully, but I have a counter-proposal that I think is more meaningful. I accept working as an independent consultant with flexibility, but I also want to create something bigger, a comprehensive educational art program specifically for young people in situations of risk and social vulnerability, teaching technical restoration, art history, scientific authentication, for children who would never normally have access to this privileged world. Henry smiled broadly with paternal pride exploding. Jonathan would be so incredibly proud hearing this. And more, Beth continued, gaining confidence and vision exponentially. I want to establish a completely free community authentication laboratory to help small museums without resources, families with unknown artistic inheritances, anyone who needs professional analysis but doesn't have financial resources. Genuine art shouldn't be exclusively for wealthy people. Gregory considered seriously for several moments. We can fund this generously, and your salary as senior consultant will comfortably cover your personal needs while you build the social program. I want to actively help, Victoria said enthusiastically. With the educational program, I can give weekly voluntary classes, teach young people about pigments. I also want to contribute, Alan said. Beth, you humiliated me professionally today, but it was an absolutely necessary lesson that my ego needed. I would be deeply honored to contribute knowledge and time. Beth looked around at these people who had judged her so severely, humiliated her so cruelly, but now genuinely supported her, and she felt something she hadn't felt in 12 long years, real hope. In the following intense and transformative months, Beth worked absolutely tirelessly. During the day, she meticulously established the educational program, which was officially named Jonathan Morgan Foundation in loving tribute to her deceased father. 20 young people from underserved communities were carefully accepted into the first pilot group. At night, she worked diligently as a senior consultant, authenticating complex works for Whitmore and Kane and various other international clients. Her professional reputation, once completely destroyed and tarnished, was being patiently rebuilt brick by brick, case by case. The community laboratory opened its doors 6 months later. In a generous space permanently donated by Gregory, Beth carefully trained 10 dedicated volunteers to do basic analysis and screening, referring technically complex cases to appropriate specialists. Victoria became her closest and most unlikely friend, a transformation that deeply surprised them both. The specialist's characteristic arrogance had been completely replaced by genuine humility, an insatiable desire to learn. You taught me something absolutely crucial, Victoria said one day while they worked side by side analyzing a questionable work. That technical knowledge without human compassion is completely useless. That being a specialist doesn't mean being superior. It means having moral responsibility to share generously. 1 full year after that fateful night that changed everything, Beth was giving an animated class to her dedicated students when a 16-year-old girl named Maria timidly raised her hand. "Professor Beth, how exactly did you know you wanted to work with art?" Beth smiled warmly, thinking of her father. "My father took me to museums since I was 3 years old. He said passionately that art was like a transcendent universal language, that a 500-year-old painting could make you feel deep emotions that words could never capture. And he was absolutely right. Art connects people across time, space, and circumstances. And after you were unjustly imprisoned," Maria continued hesitantly, "how did you not give up completely? How did you find strength to come back?" Beth took a deep breath, deciding to be completely honest. "Because my father taught me something deeply important. He said, 'Beth, the true masterpiece isn't on the hanging canvas. It's in the ability to see beauty where others only see ashes and destruction.' For years, I was the burned ashes, but I learned that we can be reborn, not by erasing the past, but by transforming it into something deeply meaningful." Maria had tears shining in her eyes. "Thank you for sharing that so honestly. It makes me feel I can overcome my own difficulties." 3 years after that transformative night, Beth received a call that would change everything again. It was from the International Police in Dubai. "Dr. Morgan, we arrested Blake Morrison. He tried to sell another stolen Caravaggio. During interrogation, he confessed to stealing the painting you were accused of. He wants to make a deal. He has information about an international art theft network." Beth had to sit down. 12 years of waiting. "What does this mean for my case?" "It means you'll be officially exonerated. Your criminal record will be completely cleared. Legally, it's as if it never happened." When the news spread, the media exploded. But Beth refused most interviews. She gave only one, to a small community newspaper. "How do you feel being exonerated?" the reporter asked. "Relieved," Beth said honestly, "but also grateful, not for the injustice, but for what it taught me. It taught me compassion. It taught me that appearances deceive. It taught me that everyone deserves a second chance." "What would you say to Blake Morrison if you could?" Beth thought carefully. "I would say that I forgive him, not because he deserves it, but because I deserve peace. Carrying anger is like drinking poison expecting someone else to die. I choose to let it go." Charles Whitmore published a public statement apologizing for how he treated Beth. Gregory made a substantial donation to the Jonathan Morgan Foundation. Victoria wrote an article about Beth for an international art magazine, calling her the greatest Renaissance art specialist of her generation. But for Beth, the most significant moment came 3 years after that initial night. Maria, her first student, had just been accepted with a full scholarship to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, the same school where Beth had studied decades ago. "Professor Beth," Maria said, hugging her tightly, "none of this would be possible without you. You showed me I can be something more, that my past doesn't define my future." Beth was crying. "You did this yourself, Maria. I only showed the path." "No," Maria shook her head. "You did more. You proved that people can change, that mistakes aren't final sentences, that there's always a way back." That night, Beth visited her father's grave for the first time since she left prison. She had avoided it for years, ashamed. But now she was ready. "Hi, Dad," she said, kneeling before the headstone. "Sorry it took so long to come. I was ashamed of disappointing you, of tarnishing the Morgan name." She placed fresh flowers. "But I built something you would have loved. I'm teaching children about art, about restoration, about seeing beauty where others only see paint and canvas." The wind blew gently, moving the trees around the cemetery. The Jonathan Morgan Foundation has already trained 43 students. 5 got scholarships to art schools. 2 are already working in museums. And all of them learned that art isn't about money or prestige. It's about human connection. Beth touched the headstone gently. "Thank you for teaching me that, Dad. For showing me that the true masterpiece isn't on the canvas, but in the impact we have on lives. I hope I've honored your legacy." 5 years after that fateful night, the Jonathan Morgan Foundation occupied an entire building. Beth had trained more than 150 promising young people. 7 had become professional restorers. 12 worked in museums. And all carried with them the lesson Beth taught, that art was the democratization of beauty. The community laboratory had authenticated more than 300 works for ordinary families, discovering 3 genuine masterpieces that would have been sold for pennies at thrift stores if not for the free analysis. Beth still worked as a consultant, but now for museums and institutions, not just auction houses. Her expertise was sought internationally, but every Saturday, without fail, she was at the Foundation's studio, teaching, because it was there, with the young people with bright eyes learning about Caravaggio and Michelangelo, that she felt most at home. Victoria, now director of authentication at Whitmore and Kane, visited regularly. "You transformed more than your life," she said one day. "You transformed how I see the world. Before, art was investment, commodity. Now I see it as you do, as a bridge between humanity. It's what it always should have been," Beth said. One Saturday afternoon, a new student arrived, a shy 14-year-old girl named Sarah, who stayed at the back of the class trying to be invisible. Beth approached gently after the lesson. "Hi, Sarah. How was your first class?" "It was amazing," Sarah said quietly. "I never thought I could learn about real art. I thought that was only for rich people." "Art belongs to everyone," Beth said firmly. "Your background doesn't determine your future. Your passion does. Your dedication does." "But," Sarah hesitated, "I heard about your story. About prison. About being accused. Weren't you angry? Didn't you want revenge?" Beth sat down beside her. "I was angry for a long time. Angry at Blake for betraying me. Angry at the system for not believing me. Angry at myself for confessing. But anger is heavy, Sarah. It weighs you down. It stops you from moving forward. So how did you let it go?" "By focusing on what I could control," Beth explained. "I couldn't control what people thought of me. I couldn't change the past, but I could control my choices moving forward. I could choose to help others. I could choose to create something meaningful from my pain." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "My mom is in prison. She says she didn't do it, but nobody believes her." Beth's heart clenched. "Do you believe her?" "I do," Sarah whispered. "But it doesn't matter what I believe. It matters more than you know," Beth said, taking the girl's hand. "Keep believing in her. Keep visiting her. Keep loving her. Because one day, the truth might come out. And when it does, she'll need to know you never gave up on her. Like Professor Blackwell never gave up on you." Exactly like that, Beth smiled through her own tears. "And Sarah, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. Always." 10 years after that night, Beth was giving a lecture at an international art symposium when she saw, in the audience, a familiar face. Blake Morrison, now 52 years old, thin and visibly aged by years in prison. After the lecture, he approached hesitantly. "Beth, I know I have no right to speak to you." "You don't," Beth agreed. "But I'll listen anyway. I wanted to apologize. I know it doesn't mean anything after everything I did, but I spent 10 years thinking about it. About how I destroyed your life for greed." Beth looked at the man who had betrayed her so completely, and felt nothing. No anger, no hatred, just peaceful indifference. "Blake, I forgave you years ago. Not for you, but for me. Because carrying anger was killing me. You took 5 years of my life. I won't give you another second. I understand." He lowered his head. I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry, truly. I believe you," Beth said. "And I hope you find peace. But our story ended a long time ago. Take care, Blake." She walked away, feeling lightness. 12 years waiting for that moment, and when it finally came, she realized she didn't need it anymore. She had already moved on. 15 years after that night that changed everything, Beth was 59 years old. The Jonathan Morgan Foundation was an internationally recognized institution. More than 500 students had gone through the program. Maria, her first student, was now an assistant curator at the Art Institute of Chicago. 2 other students had opened their own restoration studios, and countless others had taken their love of art into their lives, even following other careers. Beth still taught, but less. She spent more time mentoring young restorers and writing about democratizing access to art. Professor Henry Blackwell, now 83 years old, visited whenever he could. Jonathan would be so proud, he said every time. You didn't just clear your name. You created a legacy that will last generations. Dad always said legacy isn't about what we accumulate, but about what we give, Beth responded. I hope I'm doing that. You are, Henry smiled, much more than you imagine. One autumn afternoon, Beth received an unexpected visitor at the foundation. A young woman in her early 20s with a portfolio under her arm. Dr. Morgan, my name is Emma Blake. I'm Blake Morrison's daughter. Beth felt her breath catch. Please, sit down. Emma sat nervously. I know who you are, what my father did to you. I've wanted to meet you for years, but I was too ashamed. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Beth said gently. You're not responsible for your father's choices. I'm studying art restoration, Emma said, at Northwestern, and I wanted you to know that you're the reason why. I read about your story, about how you lost everything but still found a way to help others, about this foundation, and I thought, if you could turn something so terrible into something so beautiful, maybe I could too. Emma, that's incredibly brave of you to come here. I brought my portfolio, Emma said. I know it's presumptuous, but would you look at it? Would you tell me if I have any talent? Because if you say I do, I'll believe it. And if you say I don't, I'll believe that too. Because you're the only person whose opinion I trust completely. Beth opened the portfolio and examined Emma's work carefully. Detailed studies of Renaissance techniques, careful analysis of pigments, restoration proposals for damaged works. Emma, Beth said finally, you have real talent. But more importantly, you have integrity. You have passion. And you have the courage to face your father's mistakes and create your own path. Emma started crying. Would you consider mentoring me? I know I have no right to ask. Stop, Beth interrupted gently. You have every right. Your father's mistakes are not your burden to carry. If you want to learn, I'll teach you. That's what this foundation is about, giving people chances they deserve. Emma became one of Beth's most dedicated students, and eventually, one of the foundation's most talented instructors. She specialized in teaching at-risk youth, saying, I understand what it's like to carry shame that isn't yours. I want to help others release that burden. 20 years after that fateful night, Beth was being honored at a special event at Whitmore and Kane. Gregory had invited everyone whose life Beth had touched. The main exhibition hall was packed. All her students over the years. Victoria, Charles, Derek, all who had judged her and later supported her. And a surprise, more than 30 people she had never seen before. Who are these people? Beth asked Gregory. Families you helped at the community laboratory, he said, smiling. Who discovered valuable works through your free services? Who learned about art through your workshops? Beth, you touched more lives than you imagine. In the center of the hall was a painting covered with cloth. Gregory guided her to it. We commissioned something special, he said, to honor someone who taught us that true art isn't in what it's worth, but in what it transforms. He removed the cloth, revealing a stunning portrait. It was Beth, but not as she was now. It was Beth at 32, at the height of her previous career, holding a restoration brush. But her eyes looked forward with wisdom she would only gain later. It's beautiful, Beth whispered, tears falling. Read the plaque, Maria said, now 36 and mother of 2. Beth read, Elizabeth Beth Morgan, restorer. Teacher, visionary. She taught us that the true masterpiece isn't on the canvas, but in the ability to see beauty where others only see ashes. The room exploded in applause. Beth was openly crying, surrounded by people whose lives she had touched. Thank you, she said when she could finally speak. But this isn't about me. It's about what we built together, about community, about second chances, about never giving up even when the world gives up on you. She looked at each face, young students, respectful colleagues, true friends. My father taught me that art was universal language, but you taught me something more. That redemption is also universal. That no matter how far we fall, we can always get up. That mistakes don't define us, our choices after them do. Professor Blackwell, now 88 and frail but determined, stood up with difficulty. Beth, may I say something? Of course, Professor. I've lived a long life, Henry said, his voice still strong. I've seen many talented people, many brilliant minds, but I've never seen anyone transform tragedy into triumph the way you did. You didn't just survive injustice. You used it to create something that will outlive us all. He raised his glass to Beth Morgan, who proved that the true masterpiece isn't created on canvas, but in the lives we touch. To Beth, the room echoed. That night, after everyone left, Beth stood alone in the gallery, looking at her portrait. She thought about the journey, from celebrated restorer to convicted criminal to janitor to this moment. She thought about her father, about Blake, about all the people who had doubted her and all who had believed in her. And she realized something profound. She wouldn't change any of it, because every painful moment, every humiliation, every tear had led her here, had made her who she was, had given her the empathy and strength to help others. Thank you, Dad, she whispered to the empty room, for teaching me that beauty exists everywhere, even in the ashes, especially in the ashes. Years continued to pass, and the Jonathan Morgan Foundation grew beyond anything Beth had imagined. By the time she reached 65, the foundation operated in 5 cities across the United States: Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Boston, and Atlanta. Each location followed the same philosophy: art education was a right, not a privilege. Beth had written 3 comprehensive books on Renaissance art authentication that became standard texts in universities worldwide. Graduate students traveled from Europe and Asia to study with her. Museums consulted her on their most challenging authentication cases. But she never let the recognition change her core mission. Every Saturday morning, without exception, she still taught the introductory class for new students at the original Chicago location. She insisted on it. "Why do you still do this?" Victoria asked her one day, now herself retired from Whitmore and Kane and volunteering full-time at the foundation. "You have PhD students who could teach this class. You've earned the right to rest, because this is where it matters most," Beth explained, watching a group of nervous teenagers file into the studio. Those PhD students, they're already passionate about art. They've already found their path. But these kids, they think art is something that happens to other people, in museums they'll never visit. I need to show them it belongs to them too. Among that day's new students was a 15-year-old boy named Marcus, who sat in the back with his hood up, arms crossed defensively. Beth recognized that posture. She'd seen it 100 times, the armor of someone who expected to be told they didn't belong. "Good morning, everyone," Beth began, her voice warm. "Welcome to the Jonathan Morgan Foundation. I'm Beth, and I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. I don't care if you know anything about art. I don't care about your grades or where you come from or what mistakes you've made." Marcus's head lifted slightly. "I care about one thing only. Are you curious? Because if you're curious, I can teach you everything else." After class, Marcus approached hesitantly. "Ms. Morgan, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Is it true you went to prison?" Beth could have deflected, could have changed the subject, but she'd learned that honesty was the only currency worth trading in. "Yes," she said simply. "I was convicted of a crime I didn't commit. I spent 5 years in prison. But you're not. You're successful now. You have this whole thing." He gestured around the studio. "Success isn't about never falling, Marcus. It's about what you build after you hit the ground." "My brother's in prison," Marcus said quietly. "He says he didn't do it either. But nobody believes him. Nobody believes people like us. People like us, you know. Poor people, black people, people from neighborhoods like mine." Beth felt her heart break and mend simultaneously. "Marcus, let me tell you something. When I was in prison, I met a lot of people. And you know what I learned? The system isn't designed to believe people without power. But that doesn't mean we stop telling the truth. We fight harder. We work harder. We prove through our actions what we couldn't prove with words. How? By being so undeniably good at what we do that they can't ignore us anymore. By lifting others up so they can't dismiss us as exceptions. By changing the system from inside it." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Could you teach me? Really teach me? Not just art, but how to do what you did. How to come back from nothing." "I'd be honored," Beth said. "But Marcus, you're not starting from nothing." You're starting from here, from this moment, and that's everything. Marcus became one of the Foundation's most dedicated students. He had a particular gift for technical analysis, the mathematical precision required for authentication work. Within 2 years, he was assisting with laboratory analysis. By 20, he was co-authoring papers with Beth on new authentication techniques using machine learning algorithms. You revolutionized my understanding of scientific analysis, Beth told him one day as they worked side by side. You taught me I was worth revolutionizing, Marcus replied. Beth was 70 when she received an invitation that took her breath away. The Smithsonian was mounting a major exhibition on Renaissance art authentication techniques, and they wanted to feature her work, both her early career and the foundation she'd built. They wanted to tell the whole story, the curator explained on the phone, including your time in prison, including the false conviction. We believe it's important to show that even our most brilliant minds can be failed by the justice system. Beth hesitated. For decades, she'd been open about her past with her students, but having it displayed in a national museum felt different, more permanent, more public. She called a meeting with her senior staff and students, now a team of 15 people, including Maria, Emma Blake, and Marcus. They want to exhibit my story, Beth explained. All of it. The conviction, the prison time, everything. And I'm not sure how I feel about it. Do it, Maria said immediately. Professor, do you know how many people need to see that story? How many people think one mistake, one injustice ends everything? She's right, Emma added. My father destroyed your life, but you didn't let that destruction define you. That's not just your story. It's hope for everyone who thinks they're broken beyond repair. Marcus nodded. When I first came here, I thought success meant pretending you never struggled. You taught me it means being honest about the struggle and showing people the way through. Beth felt tears coming. You all understand this isn't just about me, right? The exhibition would feature all of you. The foundation. The work we've done together. Good, Maria said. Because that's the real story anyway. Not one person's redemption, but what redemption makes possible. The exhibition, titled The Shadow Restorer, Art, Justice, and Redemption, opened 18 months later to enormous public interest. It featured Beth's early restoration work, the technical reports from her false conviction, photographs from her years as a janitor, and then the explosive growth of the Jonathan Morgan Foundation. But the most powerful section was titled The Legacy. It featured artwork by her students, before and after photos of pieces authenticated through the community laboratory, and video testimonials from the hundreds of people whose lives the foundation had touched. At the opening gala, Beth stood before a crowd of over 500 people, art historians, museum directors, former students, and importantly, families from the communities the foundation served. When I was 44 years old, Beth began, her voice steady. I was cleaning floors in the building where I'd once been celebrated. I was invisible. I was nobody. And I thought that was all I would ever be again. She paused, looking around the exhibition space. But then I remembered something my father taught me. He said that a true artist doesn't just restore paintings. They restore hope. They restore dignity. They restore the belief that beauty belongs to everyone. I didn't save myself, she continued. I was saved by people who chose to believe me when they had every reason not to. Professor Blackwell, who never stopped investigating my case, the students who trusted me to teach them, the colleagues who became friends, and most importantly, by every single person who walked into the Jonathan Morgan Foundation and said, I want to learn. This exhibition isn't about me, Beth said firmly. It's about what becomes possible when we choose second chances. When we choose to see potential instead of past mistakes, when we choose to build instead of condemn. She gestured to the walls around them. Every piece of art in this exhibition was created, restored, or authenticated by someone who was told they weren't good enough, someone from the wrong neighborhood, someone with the wrong background, someone who made mistakes. And yet here we are, in the Smithsonian, proving that those judgments were wrong. The applause was thunderous. After the formal presentation, as guests mingled and viewed the exhibition, an elderly woman approached Beth. She looked to be in her 80s, moving slowly with a walker. Dr. Morgan, my name is Helen Peterson. I was a guard at the prison where you served time. Beth felt her body tense involuntarily. Prison memories still had power, even after all these years. I remember you, Helen continued. You spent every free moment in the prison library, reading art books, drawing, teaching other inmates about color theory and composition. You remember that? I remember thinking it was sad, Helen said, that someone with your gifts was locked away. But I also remember thinking you were different from most inmates. You were broken, but you weren't destroyed. There's a difference. Why are you telling me this? Beth asked gently. Because I need you to know that you changed lives even then. 3 women you taught in prison went on to complete art degrees after their release. One owns a small gallery now in Detroit. They credit you with giving them hope when they had none. Beth had to sit down. I never knew. I lost touch with everyone from that time. They wanted to be here tonight, but couldn't afford the trip, Helen said. But they asked me to give you this. She handed Beth a letter. Inside was a drawing, a collaborative piece, signed by 3 women whose names Beth vaguely remembered. It showed a woman's silhouette made entirely of brush strokes, rising from shadow into light. The inscription read, "You taught us we were artists when the world called us criminals. We're returning the favor. You are art in human form." Beth wept openly, not caring who saw. That night, long after the exhibition closed and the crowds dispersed, Beth stood alone in the gallery. She looked at the timeline of her life displayed on the walls, the triumphs and the tragedies, the falls and the resurrections. She thought about Blake Morrison, who'd stolen from her but inadvertently given her a greater purpose. She thought about the guards who humiliated her, teaching her empathy. She thought about the judges who'd condemned her, showing her the flaws in systems she'd once trusted blindly. "Thank you," she whispered to all of them, the ones who'd hurt her and the ones who'd healed her. "Thank you for making me into someone who could do this work." She stood before her own portrait, the one commissioned by Whitmore and Kane years ago, and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. That Beth had been broken. This Beth was whole, not because the past had been erased, but because it had been transformed. Beth Morgan died peacefully in her sleep at age 78, surrounded by student Stern family in the apartment above the original Jonathan Morgan Foundation location. She'd refused to move to anything fancier, saying, "This is where the work happens. Why would I leave?" More than 2,000 people attended her funeral. Museum directors and janitors, professors and former inmates, people she'd taught and people she'd never met, but whose lives she'd touched through her work. Maria, now 56 and executive director of the foundation, delivered the eulogy. "Beth Morgan taught us that art wasn't about what hung on walls and museums. Maria began, it was about what lived in hearts and minds. She taught us that restoration wasn't just about paintings, it was about people. When I met Beth, I was a kid from the South Side who thought art was for other people. Rich people, white people, people who spoke languages I didn't understand. Beth looked at me and said, 'Art is yours. All of it. Every painting, every sculpture, every technique. It belongs to you by right of being human.'" Maria's voice broke. She gave me permission to claim beauty, to create it, to teach it, and she did that for thousands of us. "But here's what Beth would want you to know," Maria continued. "She didn't save us. We saved ourselves. She just showed us we could. She held up a mirror and made us see what she saw, not our mistakes or our circumstances, but our potential." "The Jonathan Morgan Foundation will continue," Maria declared. "In Chicago, New York, LA, Boston, Atlanta, and 5 new cities will open in Beth's honor. We'll continue teaching that art belongs to everyone, that second chances are real, that transformation is possible, because that's not just Beth's legacy, it's our responsibility." The foundation did continue, growing to 20 locations across 3 countries over the next decade. More than 10,000 students passed through its programs. Dozens became professional restorers, curators, and teachers themselves. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from an unexpected source. The prison where Beth had served her time converted one wing into an art education center, funded by donations from the foundation. It was named the Elizabeth Morgan Center for Creative Rehabilitation. The plaque at the entrance read, "Art sees what others overlook. May all who enter here be seen." 50 years after that rainy April night, when a janitor looked at a painting and saw truth others had missed, A documentary filmmaker was making a film about Beth's life. She interviewed Maria, now retired, but still volunteering at the foundation. "What do you think Beth would want people to remember?" the filmmaker asked. Maria thought for a long moment. She'd want them to remember that she wasn't special. That's what made her special, if that makes sense. She'd want every person watching to know that they have the same capacity for transformation, the same ability to turn pain into purpose. She used to say, "The masterpiece isn't what you create, it's who you become while creating it." And Beth became someone beautiful, not despite her suffering, but because she chose to use it to prevent others from suffering. She proved that redemption isn't a destination, it's a practice. Every day, you choose. Every day, you build. Every day, you extend to others the grace you wish you'd been given. Maria smiled through tears, and that's available to everyone. You don't need to be brilliant like Beth was. You just need to be brave enough to start. The documentary ended with footage from one of Beth's last classes, teaching a group of teenagers from Chicago's West Side. Her hair was white, her hands weathered, but her eyes sparkled with the same passion she'd had at 24. "Art isn't about being perfect," she told them. "It's about being honest. Honest about what you see. Honest about what you feel. Honest about who you are and who you want to become." A student raised her hand. "But what if people judge us? What if they say we're not good enough?" Beth smiled. "Let me tell you a secret. They will judge you. People always judge. But here's the thing. Their judgment says more about them than about you. Your job isn't to prove them wrong. It's to prove yourself right. To prove to yourself that you can create beauty, find truth, make meaning." "How did you do that?" the student pressed. "One day at a time," Beth said simply. "One painting at a time. One student at a time. One choice at a time, to build instead of destroy, to hope instead of despair, to create instead of surrender." She looked around at all their faces. "You are all masterpieces in progress. Remember that, no matter what anyone tells you, no matter what you've done or what's been done to you. You are art in human form." The camera held on her face for a long moment, a face that showed every year of struggle, every moment of doubt, every instance of pain, but also every triumph, every connection, every life touched and transformed. A face that proved the truth she'd lived, that the human capacity for redemption is itself the greatest masterpiece of all.